Imagine a naval battle so obscure, you've probably never heard of it, yet it completely reshaped the silent, deadly world of submarines. How could a forgotten clash from decades ago dictate how modern subs are designed, deployed, and fight today? This isn't just history, it's the hidden blueprint behind today's undersea powerhouses. The sea before dawn feels empty, but it is not. In 1917, the Mediterranean breathes like a living thing, heavy and tense, carrying fear across its dark surface. Supply ships move slowly like tired animals, their holds full of food, fuel, and hope for armies far away. Every sailor knows the truth even if no one says it out loud. The war is no longer decided only on land. It is being strangled at sea, quietly, patiently, by shadows beneath the waves. The men aboard these ships think about home, about letters unread, about hands they may never hold again, while the water around them waits with cold indifference. In the narrow throat between Italy and Greece lies a stretch of water most maps barely notice. The Otranto Strait is not grand like the Atlantic, not famous like the English Channel. Yet in 1917 it is a choke point, a narrow gate that decides who eats and who starves. The Allies believe they have turned this gate into a wall. They call it the Otranto Barrage, a loose chain of fishing trawlers, nets, mines, and patrols meant to catch submarines like fish. On paper it looks strong. On paper it looks reassuring. Admirals point to it and say the U-boats will not pass. Sailors are told this barrier will keep them safe. But paper does not float and confidence does not stop torpedoes. The men who work these trawlers are not hardened warriors. Many were fishermen months ago. They laugh, curse, sing, and work the cold lines in the dark, believing they are part of something bigger, even if they barely understand it. Brotherhood forms quickly out here because it has to. The sea does not care if you are ready. Across the Adriatic, another group of men prepare in silence. Austro-Hungarian sailors stand on the decks of fast destroyers, their breath visible in the cool air, hands steady despite the weight of what is coming. They are not heroes in their own minds. They are tired, hungry, and loyal to each other more than to flags or empires. Orders have come down for a daring raid. The goal is simple and limited. Smash the barrage, disrupt the patrols, remind the enemy that the sea is not theirs. No one speaks of changing history. No one imagines doctrines or future wars. They joke softly, check weapons, think of sweethearts and mothers, and then push those thoughts aside. Pride fills their chests, not the loud kind, but the quiet pride of men who trust the one standing next to them. They know some of them will not return, but they go anyway. That is what makes the bond strong. As the destroyers slip forward, engines humming low, the world feels suspended between heartbeats. The first light of dawn has not yet broken, and that is exactly the point. Surprise is everything. The trawlers of the barrage drift and patrol, crews half awake, some sipping bitter coffee, others staring into black water that reflects nothing back. Then the silence breaks. Gunfire flashes like sudden lightning, sharp and violent, tearing holes in the calm. Wood splinters. Steel screams. Men shout names that vanish into smoke. Nets meant to catch submarines hang useless as shells rip through hulls. For the trawler crews there is no time to understand. Training evaporates under fear. Some fight back bravely, firing small guns at shapes moving too fast to track. Others scramble to save wounded friends, hands slick with blood and salt water. In these moments, love is not poetic. It is raw and desperate, dragging a brother away from flames, holding a hand while the ship tilts and sinks. The Allies respond, but response is not the same as control. Signals are sent, misread, delayed. Ships race toward the noise only to find confusion waiting for them. Darkness hides the attackers, and the barrage reveals its true nature. It is thin, fragile, dependent on order that does not exist in battle. Destroyers clash, shells miss by meters, water erupts like giant fists punching upward. No side gains a clean victory. Ships are damaged, some badly, but none destroyed in a way that ends the fight. Eventually, the raiders pull back, slipping away as quickly as they came, leaving wreckage, fires, and stunned survivors behind. Dawn finally breaks, pale and unforgiving, revealing floating debris and men clinging to life. The sea absorbs the evidence without judgment. To history books, this will look like a small action, a footnote. To the men who lived it, it is everything. When the guns fall silent, something heavier settles in. Admiral study reports, numbers, losses. On the surface, the results seem modest. The barrage still exists. The Central Powers gain little ground. Yet among the Allied commanders, unease grows. They cannot ignore what happened. A system they trusted failed under pressure. The realization cuts deeper than any shell. If this barrier can be broken by surface ships in a single raid, What about submarines that strike unseen? Convoys were meant to be safer. Screens were meant to protect. But safety, it turns out, is a feeling, not a fact. Sailors talk quietly about how exposed they felt, how the enemy appeared where they were told none could. Fear spreads not like panic, but like cold, seeping into decisions and plans. Pride is wounded, and wounded pride is dangerous. For the men at sea, the cost is personal. Survivors return to port carrying ghosts. Empty bunks stare back at them. Letters are written with shaking hands. Brotherhood tightens around loss because that is the only way to survive it. They speak of friends who laughed hours before dying, of bravery no one will ever record. Love becomes quieter, more urgent. A shared cigarette. A hand on a shoulder. The understanding that tomorrow may not come. These men do not talk about doctrine or strategy, but their suffering feeds those ideas all the same. Somewhere far from the smell of oil and smoke, decisions are forming that will change how wars are fought beneath the sea. None of it feels grand. It feels cruel and inevitable. The true impact of Otranto does not explode. It whispers. Allied leaders begin to question restraint. If defenses cannot fully protect convoys, then perhaps the answer is not defense at all. Perhaps the enemy must be starved faster, harder, without mercy. The lesson drawn is not about better nets or more patrols, but about escalation. If the sea cannot be controlled, it must be dominated through fear. Submarines, once seen as tools of limited use, start to look like weapons of decision. The idea that merchant ships might be fair targets, regardless of flag or cargo, no longer feels unthinkable. It feels necessary. This is how small battles change the world. Not through victory but through doubt. Not through triumph but through vulnerability laid bare. The men who planned the raid never set out to ignite this shift. They wanted to hit a blockade and go home. Yet history does not care about intentions. It cares about consequences. Otranto exposed a truth that could not be unseen. Modern war at sea would not be polite, limited, or predictable. It would be silent, ruthless, and shaped by moments most people never hear about. As the Mediterranean returns to uneasy calm, the ripples spread outward, crossing oceans and decades. The blueprint for future submarine warfare is being drawn in invisible ink, written by fear, pride, hardship, and loss. The sea keeps its secrets, but they are there, shaping steel hulls and silent crews even now. What followed the raid did not feel like recovery. It felt like standing on thin ice, listening to cracks spread beneath your feet. In ports across the Mediterranean, ships came in scarred and limping, their crews quieter than before. Men who once trusted charts and patrol routes now stared at the water as if it might suddenly open and swallow them whole. Reports from Otranto circulated through command rooms, stripped of emotion, reduced to numbers and timings, but the fear inside those pages was impossible to hide. The barrage had not collapsed, yet it had failed in the one way that mattered most. It did not inspire confidence anymore. Every sailor knew it. Every officer felt it. Something fundamental had shifted, and no one could name it yet. At sea, convoys continued because they had to. Food still needed to reach cities. Ammunition still had to feed the guns on distant fronts. Merchant captains sailed with stiff backs and forced calm, pretending the rules still worked. Escort ships circled them like nervous shepherds, sonar primitive, eyes strained, every ripple a possible threat. The ocean seemed louder now, every creak of the hull amplified by imagination. Sailors slept in short bursts, dreams filled with alarms and water rushing in. Brotherhood deepened in this tension, forged not by speeches but by shared fear. A glance was enough to say everything. If it comes, we face it together. Love became practical, almost silent, expressed through extra rations slipped into a friend's hands or a quiet watch taken so someone else could rest. In the headquarters far from the spray and smoke, arguments sharpened. Some officers insisted Otranto proved the system only needed refinement. More trawlers. Better coordination. Tighter discipline. Others felt a darker conclusion rising. They saw not a fixable flaw, but a warning. The sea was too vast. The enemy too adaptable. Barriers could always be tested, always be found wanting. These men spoke softly but firmly about changing the rules altogether. If defense failed, offense must expand. Their words carried weight because behind them stood the ghosts of Otranto, the image of fragile ships burning at dawn. Pride demanded action. Fear demanded certainty. Together they pushed policy toward a cliff. The idea that emerged was simple and terrifying. Submarines would no longer be restrained by old notions of honor or warning. Merchant ships would no longer be given time to flee or surrender. Anything that fed the enemy would be treated as an enemy itself. The justification felt logical in rooms lined with maps. If convoys could not be protected, then they must be destroyed before they reached port. This thinking did not feel cruel to those who embraced it. It felt necessary. War had already taken so much. What was one more line crossed if it ended everything sooner? Yet the weight of that choice pressed down on everyone, even those who signed the orders. They understood, even if they did not admit it, that once unleashed, this kind of warfare could never be neatly contained again. Out at sea, the first hints of this shift appeared quietly. Submarine commanders received broader authority, fewer questions asked about targets. Patrol areas expanded. Rules grew vague. Young submariners listened as veterans explained that hesitation could mean death, that mercy could sink you as surely as a torpedo. Inside cramped hulls, men learned to live inches apart, sharing air thick with oil and sweat. They joked to keep fear away, spoke of home as if it were another life entirely. Pride kept them steady, pride in their craft, in the steel beast that carried them unseen through hostile waters. Brotherhood here was absolute. If one man failed, all failed. If one panicked, everyone died. Love was present too, twisted into fierce loyalty, into promises made without words. The ocean became a chessboard where pieces moved invisibly. Merchant sailors felt the change before they understood it. Attacks came without warning. Ships exploded in seconds, lives erased before prayers could form. Survivors floated among wreckage, staring at empty horizons, wondering how the world had become so quiet and so cruel. Stories spread faster than official announcements. Fear traveled port to port, carried by rumors and by men who refused to sail again. Yet most did sail because they had families to feed and duties they could not escape. Hardship hardened them. Each departure felt heavier than the last. They hugged loved ones longer, memorizing faces, storing warmth against the cold uncertainty ahead. Back in command circles, numbers began to change. Sinkings increased. Supplies dwindled. The strategy appeared to work, at least on paper. But with every success came escalation. Enemy nations responded with more escorts, better detection, more aggressive tactics of their own. The sea grew crowded with hunters. Each innovation answered by another. Otranto's lesson echoed through every development. No system was perfect, no defense final. Submarine design evolved under this pressure. Hulls became stronger. Engines quieter. Crews trained to endure longer patrols, deeper dives, greater isolation. Modern undersea warfare was being shaped not by a single invention, but by a chain reaction that began with a raid few remembered and a weakness no one could ignore. For the men living inside these machines, the future felt far away. Each patrol was its own world, measured in depth gauges and whispered orders. They learned to trust instruments more than instincts, silence more than speed. Suspense lived with them constantly, stretched thin across hours of waiting. Every sound could be death. Every success carried guilt. Pride warred with conscience in the dark. Some wrote letters they never sent. Others carried small tokens, reminders of love that anchored them when the ocean felt endless. Tragedy followed them like a shadow because even survival changed them in ways they could not explain. When they returned to port, they were older, quieter, less certain of who they had been before. The world outside began to sense that something irreversible was happening beneath the waves. Neutral nations protested. Families demanded answers. But the machinery of war moved forward, fueled by fear and by the belief that stopping now would mean admitting everything had been for nothing. Otranto was rarely mentioned by name, yet its influence lingered in every debate. It had shown how fragile control really was, how quickly confidence could shatter. That knowledge pushed leaders toward extremes, convinced that half measures only prolonged suffering. The sea, once a highway, had become a battlefield without borders, governed by silence and sudden violence. As years passed, the outlines of modern submarine warfare sharpened. Lessons learned in blood became doctrine. Avoid detection at all costs. Strike first. Disappear. These principles would survive long after the guns of that war fell silent. The pride of innovation, the hardship of adaptation, the brotherhood of crews sealed into steel coffins, the love left waiting on distant shores, and the tragedy of lives lost unseen, all traced back through time to moments like Otranto, where a small crack widened into a chasm. History would move on, but the echo remained, vibrating through sonar pings and pressure hulls, shaping conflicts yet to come. The war eventually loosened its grip on the surface, but beneath the waves its legacy hardened into steel and doctrine. Years passed, uniforms changed, flags shifted, yet the memory of vulnerability never faded from naval minds. Men who had survived Otranto and the brutal escalation that followed carried those lessons into quieter rooms, into academies and design bureaus, into late-night conversations where coffee went cold and charts stayed open. They spoke of fear more than glory, of moments when defenses failed, of how silence itself had become a weapon. These memories did not feel dramatic anymore. They felt instructional. From them grew a new understanding. Submarines would not merely support fleets. They would become fleets in their own right. Engineers began to chase invisibility. Hulls were reshaped to slip more cleanly through water. Rivets gave way to smoother seams. Every decibel mattered. Every vibration was an enemy. The sea was no longer just water pressing in from all sides. It was a listening field, and survival depended on staying unheard. Pride returned in a new form, quieter and more technical. Designers felt it when a prototype moved silently through test waters. Commanders felt it when sonar screens stayed empty. Crews felt it when patrols ended without contact, without blood. Brotherhood remained, forged now in patience rather than fire. Long weeks underwater demanded trust deeper than friendship. You trusted the man beside you with your breath, your life, your sanity. Love endured too, stretched thin by distance and secrecy, carried in photographs tucked behind gauges. The world moved closer to another war, and submarines waited in the shadows, refined by fear remembered. When conflict returned, it did so faster and louder than before. Yet beneath that noise, the quiet hunters operated with chilling efficiency. Convoys were larger, escorts more capable, but the principles born after Otranto still guided every move. Attack without warning. Withdraw without trace. Crews learned to live with the knowledge that their success often meant unseen death. Some embraced it as duty. Others carried it like a weight they could never set down. Hardship became routine. Patrols stretched longer. Depth charges shook hulls until bolts screamed. Men prayed without words, gripping metal that felt thinner with every explosion. Brotherhood was no longer optional. It was survival itself. As technology advanced, the emotional distance between hunter and hunted grew. Sonar replaced sight. Blips replaced silhouettes. Decisions were made by hands hovering over switches, eyes fixed on glowing screens. The human cost became abstract, but it did not disappear. It simply moved inward. Veterans returned changed, quieter, their pride mixed with something harder to name. They had done what was asked. They had won battles no one saw. Yet sleep came slowly. The ocean followed them home, in dreams filled with pressure and alarms. Tragedy did not end with the war. It settled into lives, into families who sensed the distance but could not cross it. Love adapted, learned to live alongside silence. The Cold War transformed the sea once again, turning it into a place of constant tension without open battle. Submarines became symbols of ultimate power, carrying weapons that could end cities without warning. The irony was not lost on those who understood the history. A tactic born from vulnerability and fear had led to machines of absolute deterrence. Nations invested enormous pride in their fleets, parading strength while hiding it beneath the waves. Crews trained endlessly, preparing for a war they prayed would never come. Brotherhood here was almost monastic, sealed inside nuclear steel, months from sunlight. Love became memory and promise. Hardship became routine maintenance of sanity. Tragedy lingered in near misses, in silent drills that rehearsed the end of everything. And still, Otranto echoed, a reminder of how quickly balance could break. By the time the world reached the present, submarine warfare had become a blend of cutting-edge science and ancient fear. Modern boats glide almost silently, wrapped in technology unimaginable to the sailors of 1917. Yet the core truth remains unchanged. Control of the sea is fragile. Confidence can shatter in a single night. Small events can reshape strategy for generations. Navies still study obscure battles, still search for cracks in defenses, still fear the lesson Otranto taught so brutally, that no system is ever complete. Pride now lies in adaptability. Brotherhood lies in shared vigilance. Love lies in returning safely from missions no one will ever hear about. Tragedy waits patiently, held back only by discipline and restraint. In 2025, as geopolitical tensions ripple across oceans once more, the relevance of that forgotten strait feels sharper than ever. New technologies promise dominance. New doctrines claim certainty. Yet beneath them all runs the same undercurrent of doubt. The sea remains vast. The enemy remains clever. And history reminds those who listen that the future of undersea warfare is never decided by the loudest battles, but by the quiet ones that expose uncomfortable truths. Otranto was one of those moments. A blink in time. A crack in confidence. A lesson written in smoke and water that still shapes the silent giants moving beneath us now. The ocean looks calm, but it remembers everything. The final inheritance of that forgotten night is not found in weapons alone, but in the mindset of those who command them. Modern submarines move through the deep like thoughts rather than machines, guided by doctrines shaped by fear learned the hard way. Every patrol today carries echoes of past mistakes, of moments when certainty collapsed under fire. Crews train with an intensity that borders on ritual, repeating drills until muscle memory replaces panic. They know that technology can fail, that systems can be fooled, that the ocean always has the last word. Pride lives in preparation now, not bravado. It is the pride of men and women who understand that survival depends on humility before the sea and absolute trust in each other. Brotherhood remains the core, unbroken by decades, forged again every time a hatch seals shut and daylight disappears. Inside these vessels, time stretches and bends. Days blur into routines marked by watches and whispered conversations. The outside world becomes abstract, reduced to coordinates and probabilities. Love exists in fragments, recorded messages, folded letters, mental images revisited like talismans. Hardship is constant but controlled, managed through discipline and shared purpose. Crews know they operate in a moral gray space shaped by history's harsh lessons. They are taught restraint as fiercely as aggression, aware that the line between deterrence and disaster is thin. The shadow of unrestricted warfare still looms, a reminder of how easily necessity can justify extremes. Otranto's lesson whispers here too. Once boundaries are crossed, they are difficult to rebuild. Above the waves, policymakers debate strategy with new language but familiar fears. Artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, advanced sonar, and cyber warfare promise clarity, yet uncertainty remains. Every innovation creates new vulnerabilities. Every claimed advantage invites a counter. Analysts still return to obscure case studies, still point to moments where small failures exposed larger truths. The Battle of Otranto appears in footnotes and lectures, not for its firepower but for its consequence. It stands as proof that perception matters as much as capability. Once confidence cracks, escalation follows. That pattern remains dangerously relevant in a world where undersea cables, energy routes, and deterrent patrols crisscross the globe unseen. For sailors past and present, the emotional cost links generations. Veterans speak rarely, but when they do, their stories align across time. The feeling of waiting. The weight of responsibility. The knowledge that decisions made in silence can alter countless lives. Tragedy is not always loud. Often it is the absence of sound, the unanswered signal, the empty space where a ship should be. Love endures despite this, stubborn and quiet, anchoring those who return and honoring those who do not. Pride becomes something gentler, less about victory and more about service without recognition. Brotherhood survives because it must. In the deep, there is no room for anything else. As the world watches surface events and loud confrontations, the most consequential movements remain hidden. Submarines patrol silently, carrying the accumulated weight of a century of lessons. Their design, their tactics, even their restraint are shaped by moments like Otranto, when a small clash revealed how fragile control really was. That forgotten battle did not shout its importance. It whispered it, and the whisper carried farther than anyone expected. Today's undersea powerhouses are not just products of innovation, but of memory, of fear acknowledged and adapted to rather than ignored. The sea looks peaceful to those who glance at it, but beneath that calm lies a history of choices made under pressure. Otranto matters because it reminds us that the future of warfare is often decided not by grand victories, but by overlooked failures that force uncomfortable change. In 2025, as nations test each other's resolve below the waves, that lesson is more relevant than ever. The ocean remains vast. Silence remains powerful. And somewhere in the deep, the echo of a dawn raid in 1917 still shapes how the world prepares for what might come next.